everyone, Sophia Persephone here. Today I'm going to talk you through the spiritual awakening stages, so you have the overview of the spiritual awakening process end to end. Now, please understand this is a fairly broad and generic view of awakening. There's lots of different flavours, but the process I'm going to outline in this video seems to be consistent for all awakeners, even though you yourself may have additional experiences on top. You'll see content all over the internet with different numbers of stages. I use 7 stages of awakening because in my coaching practice and my spiritual awakening research, it seems to be the cleanest split, and also it aligns with the chakras. An awakening starts at the root and it ends at the crown. Right. When we talk about spiritual awakening stages, we have to understand they're not always sequential. There are specific milestones which every individual must pass, but they might come in a different order for some people, and often they overlap. One way to think of the spiritual awakening stages is more as modules that we have to complete. So let's get clear on what spiritual awakening is. It's the process of reintegration of the earthbound soul with its higher self situated in the higher dimensions. You are building a data pipe. The soul is the conscious mind, the higher self is the superconscious mind, and we experience the higher self as intuition prior to our awakening. During the spiritual awakening process, we have to strengthen our conscious mind so it leads our overall system. And that means that along the way, it needs to gain authority over the ego, the unconscious mind, and the body, the subconscious mind. So a lot of awakening is really about teaching ourselves mind over matter. Okay, so let's dive into the spiritual awakening stages. Stage 1 of awakening is resolution. And this stage almost always starts when we're unconscious, i.e. we're not aware that we're awakening. We might not even believe in the existence of the soul or any of the woo-woo stuff. And the resolution stage is characterized by deep inner work. We untangle all of the human traumas and issues we've collected since birth. And if you're higher evolved and due to awaken in this lifetime, typically you'll have collected quite a lot. And that's down to the game of life, which I explain in another video. So the purpose of this stage of awakening is to build a stable emotional and mental platform for conscious awakening. And I can't stress this enough. If you don't do your inner work, you won't consciously awaken. And this stage of awakening can take years. It took 7 for me. And it can continue way into the later stages of awakening. Even in transcendence, we might still be dealing with a small percent of those traumas and issues that still need to be untangled. Usually with this stage of awakening, we only understand it as part of the process we've been going through in a later stage. Spiritual awakening stage 2 is discovery. We become deeply interested in spiritual and metaphysical matters, and often we'll start learning about topics such as quantum physics. And the trigger for this learning can be an otherworldly experience. So it can coincide with stage 3, the Epiphany, or even stage 4, which is connection. And while there's usually a period of very intense research, so the full discovery stage, if we continue the spiritual awakening journey, we usually want to keep on learning. So this is another stage that can extend way into the later stages of awakening and beyond. In a sense, it never really stops. One other thing that can happen during the discovery phase is we start to investigate some spiritual techniques, even though we might not think of them as such, or we might not be looking into them for a spiritual purpose, but we might take up yoga, for example, or we might start spending more time in nature. We might feel drawn to the great outdoors. The purpose of the discovery stage is to build a platform of knowledge so that our guides have points of reference that they can use once they've established contact and they've started to teach us directly in the later stages of awakening. Spiritual awakening stage 3 is the spiritual epiphany, and this is more of an event than a stage. It's the moment that we realize there's more going on than just this 3D environment. Sometimes we'll also realize at that point that we're going through an awakening, or that might come a little bit later down the line. But the epiphany can come as a slow dawning over time, or it can come as a huge psychic event. I've heard of people having waking visions, incredible dreams, or they might have had experiences on certain types of drug. And the epiphany marks the start of your conscious awakening. And this is usually the time when people talk about having had a spiritual awakening. I've had a spiritual awakening. But really, it's just one stage of a process that they're already in, and there's actually still a lot more to go. Stage 4 of spiritual awakening is connection, and it's one of the most enjoyable. This is when all the weird and wonderful things start to happen to us. We make contact with our guides, we become intensely psychic, we get into flow. Now, what's happening during the connection stage is that the universe has opened up all of our chakras to their full extent. We're receiving all of the 7 major energies of the universe in abundance. Why do they do this? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first is humans tend to believe things when they experience them firsthand. We trust what we see and what we hear. So the direct experience that we get during the connection stage of awakening serves to convince us that, yep, there's something else out there. But there's also another really important reason why this happens. The universe is showing you how your reality could be if you continued the spiritual awakening process right through to the very end, to full transcendence. Once you've built your data pipe and learned how to use it, you regain all of the power that you experienced in the connection phase. It's not as much of a roller coaster as it is during connection, simply because you're vibrating at a much higher rate by the end of awakening. So the distance between your earthbound self and your higher self is much smaller. You only have to go up a couple of floors rather than a whole skyscraper. But the underlying abilities are there, they're restored. So the purpose of the connection phase is to reveal your future and commit you to your awakening process. Now, this is much needed because when you reach 50% integration with your higher self, remember, awakening is about integration, you're going to enter spiritual awakening stage 5, which is the spiritual dark night of the soul. So stage 5 of awakening, the spiritual dark night of the soul, is the opposite to connection, quite literally. The flow of energy through all of your chakras is restricted to a very low degree, sometimes as low as 5%, which is the minimum required to sustain life. So you go from a massive roller coaster of psychic input to literally nothing overnight. There's no communication at all, no sense of connection. And it's kind of a very strange type of depression. You may have the crying and emotional purging that you get with a normal depression, and that's good, by the way, but there's usually a period of feeling quite lobotomized. We just don't feel like ourselves, and we feel like our life force has gone. It's a really tricky stage of spiritual awakening, and the vast majority of people drop out of the journey altogether at this point. Now, what I tell the people I coach is that this is the worst thing you will ever go through. Nothing will ever be this bad again. And it's really important to press on because what lies on the other side is really magnificent. Daily meditation is the key. Do as much as you possibly can, hours and hours if you can. And that's because even if you can't feel it, you're still integrating in the background. And meditation is your tool of integration, your primary tool of integration. You exit the spiritual dark night of the soul at around 65 to 70% integration, and everything starts to crackle back into life, and it comes just as quickly as it went, so within 24 hours. Now, I've actually written a book about how to get through the dark night of the soul, so if you need deeper guidance, I'm going to link you to it. Right. Let's talk about spiritual awakening stage 6. This is advanced learning, and this phase can take a little while. By this point, you should feel that you've manifestly changed as a human being. You're not the same person, and you're not. And that's because the integration process means you now identify more strongly with your soul and your higher self than you do with your human avatar. Because you're now well on your way to full integration, you have access to the resources you need to do some difficult things. And there's 3 main focuses of the advanced learning stage. Firstly, you're going to embed your daily spiritual routine and you're going to learn new techniques. This routine and those techniques are what you're going to use to access your full soul power post-transcendence. Secondly, your team are going to test you on your judgment. You'll find you go through a phase where you can't rely on signs and communications in the same way. They're going to misdirect you. And that's so that you learn to fall back on your own resources. You get your information by turning inwards. And this is really important because your team has an energy quota that they can use to help awakeners. If they teach you to be self-sufficient, they can use more of that energy to help other people rather than you. Thirdly, you're going to release what doesn't serve you. It's a massive transformational process that can continue into transcendence and sometimes beyond. And it means, for example, giving up substances that you have a dependence on, leaving careers which don't fulfill you, and walking away from relationships which no longer give you what you need. That can be partners, family, and friends. Now that sounds difficult, but actually it's easier than you think, because as energy beings, we're naturally going to seek out people with a similar vibrational rate to ourselves. And the vibrational dissonance we experience with people who are at a much lower rate than ourselves can become pretty unbearable. There's a few other milestones we tend to reach in the advanced learning stage. For some people, they might come sooner or later, but we shed our ego. We start to think of ourselves as a we rather than an I. We might learn the name of our soul and our higher self, which is really useful during the transcendence stage, as I'll explain. We should have an open line of communication with our guides by now. We can talk with them telepathically during meditation and sometimes outside of meditation using verbal language. We should be pretty clear on our purpose by the end of advanced learning too. Now, there is still some weird and wonderful stuff that happens in the early part of advanced learning, but typically this dies down a lot by the end because of that raise in vibrational rate. It's not unusual to feel a little bit of grief over this. We miss the roller coaster, but that's normal, and just give yourself time to adjust and you'll find that you come to terms with that pretty quickly. The advanced learning stage ends at 100% integration with our higher self. So how do you know if you're 100% integrated? You ask your guides, always in meditation, because meditation is sacred. It's the only time you can be sure that you're getting accurate information from members of your team. So just ask them in meditation, how far integrated am I? Okay, so spiritual awakening stage 7 is transcendence. It's a tricky stage because our expectation is that the journey will be linear from now on, but it's not. And transcendence also can take a long time, many months. So what is it? My team explained it to me as in integration, we're building the lift or the elevator, and in transcendence, we're building the elevator shaft. So by the end of this stage of awakening, we've established the mechanics which allow us to elevate and enter higher self modality. So during transcendence, your team are going to dot some I's and cross some T's. There's a process of refinement that's going on. If you still need to work on judgment and self-sufficiency, you're going to get some of those lessons. Learning to set boundaries also seems to be a key lesson which comes out in this phase as well. If you still need to release things that don't serve you, then your team are going to make it harder and harder for you to fall back into those patterns of behavior. One example I have of this is that a relationship had to become abusive before the awakener finally left their partner, so it can get quite extreme. The other thing you're going to find during transcendence is that you get periods of time when communication shuts off. It's a bit like the dark night of the soul, but without the feeling of depression. This is to force you to learn to use the elevator shaft that you've built. Remember, we need to be self-sufficient. We need to learn to do all of this ourselves. Throughout your awakening, your team and your higher self have been coming down to you, but you need to learn how to ascend to them. That way, you're accessing the store of universal knowledge under your own steam, and they're preserving energy so they can use it elsewhere. Protocol for ascension is really simple. You just use a visualization in meditation of ascending in an elevator. When you come out of the doors, you see your higher self there and you'll be able to talk to them. And that's why it's really useful to uncover the name of your higher self, and also try to meet them in a meditation, because then you can visualize them a lot more clearly. You know what you're looking for. So how will you know when you've reached 100% transcendence? Again, ask your guides. There's no great fanfare at the end, which surprised me a little bit. And you might not feel that much different, because remember, it's a process. It's a sliding scale. Personally, I observed a slight expansion of the mind in day-to-day life. However, this is where it gets really interesting. Post-transcendence. You find you have the ability to re-enter a modality that is really similar to the connection phase, just less weird. You have to adhere to a pretty strict spiritual routine to get there, but when you do, it is like a rocket ship. There is an enormous energetic rush which you need to learn how to handle. And you can do this through regular affirmations and crown chakra work. I'll create a deep dive video about transcendence and post-transcendence soon, and I can share some protocols. But what you find post-transcendence is that small actions have a very big impact, both negatively and positively. It really doesn't take much to shift modalities. And that's because at this point, you are enormously powerful. You are manifesting through every single thought and behavior without even really being consciously aware of it. So what that means is that by the time you're in post-transcendence, you can access your full soul power. And that means, most importantly, you can pursue your purpose. Remember, our collective mission is to transform global society and to help the earth reach its next phase of enlightenment. That's why we're waking up. We're waking up so we can access this power and we can use it. So I hope this video about spiritual awakening stages has been helpful. I'm going to create some deep dive videos about some of the individual stages, so please look out for those.